You can explain the teaching clearly. You understand that you are not the body, not the mind, not the collection of roles and relationships you inhabit. You have read the texts, worked through the logic, sat with a teacher. Yet last week, a difficult conversation at work left you anxious for days. A relationship ended and grief arrived with its full weight. Old patterns of reaction, the ones you thought understanding would dissolve, surfaced exactly as they always have. You are left with a question that feels almost embarrassing to ask. If I know this, why am I still like this? It has a name. A student who can teach the verses but weeps over the bank balance, who can articulate the limitless nature of the self and still lose sleep over what someone said. This is what Swami Paramarthananda calls the scholarly samsari. The paradox is real and common, and the fact that it feels like a personal failure is itself part of the confusion. The assumption buried inside the question is worth examining directly. Most seekers, once they arrive at genuine intellectual understanding, expect something to shift noticeably and quickly. Not a flash of light or a mystical experience, but at minimum a reliable steadiness, a reduction in fear, a loosening of old habits. When this doesn't happen, the mind draws one of two conclusions. Either the knowledge is not real knowledge, it is only intellectual, whatever that means, or some deeper experience is still missing, some inner event that hasn't yet occurred and would finally make everything click into place. Both conclusions feel reasonable. Both are wrong. The first misunderstands what kind of knowledge Vedanta delivers and how it operates. The second sends the seeker looking in a direction Vedanta explicitly does not point. Swami Paramarthananda is precise on this. The problem is not that the knowledge is only intellectual. All knowledge is intellectual. The problem is something different entirely. There is a precise scope to what Vedantic knowledge accomplishes. The frustration most seekers carry comes from expecting it to do something it was never designed to do. What Vedantic knowledge does is remove self-ignorance. The root assumption that you are a limited, bounded, mortal individual who must struggle to become whole. This removal is immediate. The moment a valid means of knowledge, the teaching of the scriptures, properly unfolded by a teacher, communicates I am the limitless, non-dual self, and the student understands it. The ignorance that generated the sense of limitation is gone. A single lamp does not gradually push back darkness. It ends it. Jnana ends the specific darkness it targets. Knowledge removes ignorance. It does not remove the consequences of ignorance that have already accumulated in the body, the mind, and the circumstances of your life. These are two entirely different things. A man counts his companions after crossing a river and finds only 9. Convinced he has lost the 10th, he beats his head against a tree in grief. A bystander points and says, "You are the 10th. Count yourself." The instant the man understands this, his grief dissolves. He is not missing. He never was. The ignorance and the sorrow it caused are over in that moment, but he is still wearing a bandage. The physical wound on his head, caused by his grief before the knowledge arrived, does not disappear when he discovers he was the 10th man all along. It heals on its own schedule. The knowledge resolved the ignorance that caused the suffering. It did not reach backward and undo the physical momentum that the suffering had already set in motion. This is the precise boundary. Jnana dissolves ajnana. It does not dissolve prarabdha karma, the portion of past action already in motion, which maintains this body, its biological sensations, and the broad contours of this life's circumstances. Nor does it instantly reorganize the deeply grooved mental habits that years of living as a limited self have carved into the mind. The bandage and the old grooves remain, even as the ignorance that created them is gone. If fear arises in you tomorrow morning, that fear is not proof that your knowledge failed or that you never understood. It is the bandage. It is the momentum of patterns laid down before knowledge arrived, or patterns that knowledge has arrived to address but has not yet had time to dissolve through assimilation. Turning on a light in a cluttered room removes the darkness immediately and completely. But the clutter is still there. The room is visible now. You can see exactly what needs to be moved, but seeing it and having moved it are not the same event. Knowledge gives you the light. It does not rearrange the furniture. The question the seeker is living with is not, why didn't knowledge work? Knowledge worked. It did what it does. The question is, What happens to the room now that the light is on? Knowledge removes ignorance, but the removal of ignorance does not reach back into the mind and erase everything that ignorance built while it was operating. The habits are still there. This is the source of the confusion. Think about what the mind has been doing, without interruption, across this entire lifetime. And according to Vedanta, across countless lifetimes before it, every experience of fear confirmed, I am a limited, vulnerable person who can be harmed. Every loss confirmed, I am incomplete, and I need things to be whole. These confirmations were not stored as conscious conclusions. They settled into the mind as automatic orientations, running beneath the threshold of deliberate thought. By the time you sat down with a text or a teacher, the mind had already spent years reinforcing a particular groove. Intellectual knowledge does not fill that groove. It stops digging it deeper. This is what the tradition calls viparita bhavana, habitual thinking that runs contrary to the teaching. The word viparita means contrary or reversed. The mind has a prior orientation, laid down long before the teaching arrived, and that orientation continues to fire on its own momentum. When something threatens what you love, the mind does not pause to consult the Vedantic conclusion. It reacts from the groove. That reaction, the tightening in the chest, the surge of anxiety, the familiar collapse into sorrow, is viparita bhavana in operation. This confusion is entirely normal. Every serious student of this teaching has faced it. The mistake is to interpret the reaction as evidence that the knowledge is counterfeit. The subconscious impressions that generate these reactions are called vasanas, literally fragrances, residues left behind by repeated experience and identification. A vasana is not a thought you are having right now. It is a tendency that precedes thought, shaping which thoughts arise at all, how strong they feel, how long they persist. When the teacher says, "You are limitless," the intellect receives that. When your phone rings with a particular caller's name, the vasana fires before the intellect can say anything. This is not failure of understanding. It is the difference between knowing something and having that knowledge live in the body and the subconscious. Together, hinishakimaitu, viparita bhavana and vasana constitute what the tradition calls pratibandha, obstacles that prevent knowledge from producing its natural fruit of peace. There is a name for knowledge in this condition. Sapratibandhaka jananam, obstructed knowledge. The knowledge exists. The pramana has functioned. Self-ignorance has been removed at the root. But the knowledge is held hostage by the emotional turbulence that vasana continues to generate. The water is in the tank, the tap is blocked. When someone moves a light switch to the other side of a door, you know clearly that the switch is on the right now, yet for weeks afterward, your hand reaches left in the dark, every single time, automatically, before the intellect can intervene. Once you notice, you correct. But the correction does not stop the hand from reaching left again tomorrow. The habit dissolves through repetition of the correct response, until the new groove is deeper than the old one. Viparita bhavana works exactly like this, only the grooves are not from weeks of using a light switch. They are from years, or lifetimes, of treating the body-mind as the self. The mind will keep reaching for the old identification. This is not a defect in your understanding. It is a description of how conditioned minds work. Knowing this does not make the reaching stop, but it prevents you from misreading it as proof that you do not know. If habits were the only obstacle, there would be a clean explanation. Work on the mind, weaken the grooves, gain peace. But the student runs into something stranger. Even on days when the mind is genuinely calm, when habitual reactivity has quieted, suffering still arrives, in the body, in circumstances, in situations that have nothing to do with thought. The ache in the knee does not care whether you have understood Atma. The difficult colleague arrives whether or not you sat in contemplation that morning. It is parabdha karma, the portion of past actions that has already begun to fructify, running its course. Vedantic analysis distinguishes three categories of karma. Sannyasita is the vast storehouse of all accumulated past actions across countless lives. Agami is karma being freshly created now. Prarabdha is the specific subset of past karma already extracted from the storehouse and set in motion. It generated this particular body, this set of circumstances, this lifespan with its characteristic experiences of pleasure and pain. Knowledge when it arises, burns sanasita and stops the accumulation of new agami by dissolving the sense of doership that generates it. But prarabdha cannot be touched. It is already in motion. The seed has already sprouted. You cannot unsprout it. This is not a theological complication added to soften an awkward fact. It follows directly from what knowledge does. Knowledge removes the ignorance that I am a limited, separate individual who must acquire, protect, and achieve in order to be whole. That ignorance is gone the moment understanding arises. But the body was not created by this lifetime's ignorance alone. It was set in motion long before, and it must run through its allotted experiences. Prarabdha is what the tradition calls Ishvara Srishti, the created order, and the wise person's body is as much a part of that order as anyone else's. The knower of Atma still gets hungry. The bones still age. The illustration both teachers reach for is the released arrow. A hunter draws his bow, believing the shape in the bushes is a tiger. The arrow leaves his hand. A moment later he sees it as a cow. His ignorance is corrected instantly and completely. But the arrow cannot be recalled. It will complete its trajectory regardless of what the hunter now knows. The ignorance that launched it is gone. The momentum it carries is not. This is prarabdha, action set in motion before the dawn of knowledge, which must exhaust themselves through experience. The 10th man who finally recognizes himself is flooded with relief. The grief that made him beat his head against the tree vanishes the instant he counts himself. But the bandage on his head does not vanish. The physical result of past confusion remains and heals at its own pace. The grief needed knowledge to end it. The bandage needs time. Not every experience of discomfort after gaining knowledge is evidence that knowledge is absent or incomplete. Some of it is the arrow finishing its flight, biological pain, situational difficulty, the body's natural aging. These are not kept in place by remaining ignorance. They are kept in place by prarabdha, which runs on its own schedule. The student who treats every physical ache or difficult circumstance as proof of incomplete understanding is adding psychological suffering to what is the mechanics of a life already in motion. What knowledge changes is the inner response. The body may still carry pain. The circumstances may still be difficult. The world continues exactly as it was. But the wise person no longer generates secondary suffering. The interpretation of events as proof of personal inadequacy, the compulsive grasping and fearing that comes from believing oneself to be a permanently incomplete individual. Prarabdha delivers the experience. Whether it becomes suffering depends on what the mind does with it. If prarabdha is the territory of time and patience, what is the student's work? The effort that bridges knowledge and its full emotional fruit. That is where nididhyasana enters. Intellectual understanding and emotional freedom are not the same event. The knowledge arrives in the intellect first. The emotional personality, built over years of opposite conditioning, does not restructure itself in response to what the intellect now knows. Something must be done to close that distance. The traditional teaching is precise about this. There is a three-step sequence: shravana, listening to the teaching until self-ignorance is removed at the intellectual level; manana, reflecting until all doubts are resolved into conviction; and nididhyasana, contemplation that works on something in the first two steps cannot reach. Shravana removes ignorance. Manana removes doubt. Neither touches viparita bhavana, the habitual thinking that runs contrary to the teaching. That is the domain of nididhyasana. This distinction matters because many students stop at the first step and wonder why the second and third haven't happened on their own. They have heard the teaching. They have resolved their intellectual doubts. They can explain the non-dual vision clearly, yet the emotional personality continues to react as if none of it were true. Viparita bhavana, the mind's ingrained habit of taking itself to be a limited, vulnerable, suffering individual, is not an intellectual error. It is a behavioral groove. It does not respond to argument. It responds only to repetition in the opposite direction. Nididhyasanam is that repetition. It is not meditation in the sense of emptying the mind or achieving a special state. It is the deliberate, sustained dwelling on what the teaching has established. I am the limitless, unchanging witness of this mind. Until that orientation begins to displace the older one, the goal is not to gain knowledge that is not already there. The goal is to let the knowledge that is already there sink from the intellect into the emotional personality. To convert jnana, the cognitive fact, into vijnana, the assimilated understanding that holds steady under pressure, that does not collapse when fear arises or grief arrives. Drop a cube of sugar into a glass of milk. The sugar is present. The sweetness is chemically inevitable, but the milk does not taste sweet until the sugar is stirred in. The stirring is nididhyasana. The sugar sitting undissolved at the bottom is knowledge resting unused in the intellect. Technically there, producing nothing. This is why the student who can teach Vedanta brilliantly still experiences fear. The knowledge is in the glass. It has not been stirred. The teaching describes nididhyasana as entertaining sadvritti, thoughts aligned with the truth of the self, repeatedly and intentionally. When the habitual thought, I am afraid, I am insufficient, I am a sufferer, arises, the practice is to redirect. There is fear in the mind. I am the witness of that fear. The fear is an object in my awareness. It is not what I am. This is not positive thinking. It is not suppression. It is the correction of a specific error, applied each time the error surfaces. Over time, the groove of viparita bhavana loses depth. The new orientation, repeated consistently, begins to run with less effort. The student who has done shravana and manana is not starting over. The knowledge is established. Nididhyasanam does not question it, it assimilates it. The direction of travel is fixed. What remains is the distance between knowing the destination and the body arriving there, a distance that only movement covers. Here is a way to gauge where you stand, not by asking whether fear ever arises, but by watching what happens to it afterward. A person doing this work seriously will notice something specific. The fears still come, but not as often. When they do, they don't land as hard. And when they pass faster. This is a measurable sequence. Frequency, intensity, and recovery time all move in one direction, down. This metric is the signature of nididhyasana working. Seekers routinely misread their own progress. They expect the emotional life to go quiet all at once. And when it doesn't, they conclude the practice has failed. But the nature of vasana, subconscious grooves formed over enormous stretches of time, is that they dissolve gradually, not in a single moment. Nididhyasanam is not a switch. It is more like the sun rising. The room doesn't go from pitch dark to noon in an instant. There is a slow, unmistakable brightening, and at some point you notice you can see the furniture. The Sanskrit term for what this process produces is jivan mukti phala, the fruit of liberation while still living. It is the tangible reduction, here and now, of emotional disturbances. Fear does not announce your incompleteness. Its diminishing frequency announces your progress. Sorrow does not mean the knowledge was false. Its shorter recovery time means the knowledge is beginning to hold. A person with deeply assimilated knowledge encounters the same life situations. Financial pressure, physical illness, the loss of someone close that would once have pulled them into prolonged emotional turbulence. The reaction arises, does what it does, and subsides. They are not performing equanimity. They find, more and more often, that the disturbance did not take root. This is anujvara nivritti, the gradual receding of the secondary fever. The primary fever was self-ignorance, and knowledge addressed that directly. The secondary fever is the emotional residue left behind by years of living as though the ignorance were true. That residue cools over time, not overnight. Prarabdha continues to deliver its allotted experiences throughout this process. The body still ages, circumstances still change, physical pain still registers. None of this is evidence that liberation has been denied. The wise person navigates the same world as before, with the same body, in the same situations, but the habitual interpretation of those experiences as personal catastrophes loses its grip. The world's contents do not change. The relationship to them does. The diminishing of disturbances is the fruit, not the criterion, of knowledge. If a student takes the presence of fear as proof that they don't yet know, they will spend their energy hunting for an emotional state rather than deepening the intellectual conviction that feeds nididhyasana. The knowledge came first. The emotional transformation follows. at the pace the mind allows, treating the absence of disturbance as the goal displaces the work. Even as the disturbances recede, there remains a witness to their receding, something that observed the fear when it was frequent and observes its lessening now, something that was never the disturbance itself. That witness has not changed at all across the entire arc of this process. Fear arises in the mind. Something in you watches the fear, unchanged by it. That watching is not a skill you develop through nididhyasana. It is what you already are. The practice removes the habit of overlooking it. The mind has habits. The body has momentum, and neither is you. You are the one in whose presence fear appears, runs its course, and subsides. The sakshi, the purities, unchanging witness consciousness, does not experience fear. It witnesses the mind experiencing fear. Swami Paramarthananda names the habitual error precisely. Instead of "I am angry," the sakshi sees there is anger in the mind. This shift, from being the one who is afraid to being the one who observes the fear, is the reversal that nididhyasana makes possible. The mind is not destroyed. The anger or fear may still arise, but you have, as he puts it, neighborized the mind. It is the mind next door. Its noise reaches you. It does not become you. Swami Dayananda locates the mechanism exactly. To be unhappy, you must first construct a false identity. You create an ideal version of yourself. That version looks back and finds you wanting, and the gap between them is experienced as fear or shame. But the Atma cannot be afraid of itself. The ahankara, the ego that takes itself to be the body-mind, can be threatened. When the self is seen clearly as the witness, the threatening structure collapses. Not because the mind stops producing its weather, but because you stop living inside the weather as though it were your home. Swami Paramarthananda offers the clearest image for this. You have been mistaking yourself for a character burning in a film. The fire on screen looks real. The character's suffering looks real. But you are the screen. Does the fire in the movie burn the screen? The screen is not untouched because it is distant or indifferent. It is untouched because it is of a different order entirely. The fire depends on the screen to appear. The screen does not depend on the fire for anything. Vasana and prarabdha continue. The screen still shows the film. The mind will still produce its moments of agitation, because the habits formed over lifetimes do not dissolve in a single sitting. The body will still carry its momentum, because the arrow in flight cannot be recalled. None of this is a problem for the witness. The problem only exists for whoever believes they are the wave, the character, the one inside the film. The wave is mortal, the water is not. The character burns, the screen does not. You have always been the water, the screen, the witness. Nididhyasanam is not a journey toward this. It is the steady removal of the habit of believing otherwise. Knowledge removes the root, the ignorance of what you are. The symptoms of that ignorance, habits and momentum, take time to exhaust themselves, and nididhyasana is the means by which they are steadily unwound. But the witness is never implicated in any of it. What becomes visible from here is not another problem to solve, but a way of moving through daily life in which every arising emotion is met by someone who knows they are not it. That is what Jivan Mukti looks like from the inside.